April 27, 1945, 1700 hours, Berlin, Germany. The Soviet army is 4 miles from the Reich Chancellery. Artillery shells are landing in the gardens above Hitler's underground bunker every 3 minutes. The city is burning. 2 million civilians are trapped inside a ring of steel that is closing at the rate of a city block per hour. And Hitler's most senior SS liaison officer is drunk in his mistress's apartment 4 miles away. He is unshaven, he is out of uniform, and beside him on a round table sits a small leather suitcase that is about to end his life. Inside that suitcase are diamonds, rubies, gold watches, over 100,000 Reichsmarks, Swiss currency, road maps of Berlin, and 2 passports, both carrying the photograph of the same woman, both in different names, one of them British. His name is Hermann Fegelein. He is a general of the Waffen-SS. He is married to Eva Braun's sister. He is Himmler's personal representative at the Führer bunker, and in approximately 30 hours he will be dead, shot in a garden, while the man he served prepared to marry the sister of his wife 50 meters away underground. But here is what almost every history book, documentary, and film gets completely wrong about this story. Fegelein was not a drunk coward who panicked and ran. He had a plan, a sophisticated plan, a plan that involved a British spy, a waiting aircraft, a briefcase of documents that neither he nor Himmler wanted anyone to find, and an escape route that came within hours of succeeding. This is the real story of Hermann Fegelein. Not the meme, not the movie, the truth. And the truth is considerably more dangerous than the legend. Before you can understand what happened in that apartment on the 27th of April, 1945, you need to understand who Hermann Fegelein actually was, because the man history has reduced to a punchline was one of the most complex, most protected, and most dangerous figures in the entire SS hierarchy. And understanding why Himmler protected him for 15 years explains everything that happened in the last 72 hours of his life. Hermann Fegelein was born in October 1906 in Ansbach, Bavaria. His father ran a cavalry riding school. Fegelein could ride before he could read. This detail matters because it explains almost everything about how he rose and why he was useful. His early career was a catalog of the behavior that would define him for the rest of his life. He dropped out of Munich University. He joined the Bavarian State Police. He was dismissed in 1929 for stealing examination answers from an instructor's office, the first documented evidence of what the historical record politely calls sociopathic tendencies, and what everyone around him called something considerably less polite. He joined the Nazi Party in 1930 through his family connection to one of its founders. He joined the SS in April 1933. By November 1934, he held the rank of captain in the Allgemeine SS, having received no formal officer training whatsoever. His qualification for command was that he could ride a horse better than almost anyone in Germany, and that his father's riding school had been training SS cavalry before the organization existed. This is how Fegelein entered Himmler's orbit, and once inside that orbit, the normal rules of advancement, accountability, and consequence simply stopped applying to him. By June 1944, Fegelein had been appointed Himmler's personal SS liaison officer at Führer headquarters. He had also married Gretel Braun, Eva Braun's younger sister, on the 3rd of June 1944. Most historians who have examined this relationship closely concluded that it was not a love match, it was a career move. Marrying into Hitler's immediate family circle placed Fegelein 1 degree of separation from the Führer himself. It was the most audacious piece of social climbing in the history of the Third Reich. On the 20th of July, 1944, Fegelein was slightly wounded in the bomb plot against Hitler at the Wolf's Lair. He received the Special Wound Badge. He also received the swords to his Knight's Cross. He was by any conventional measure of the Nazi hierarchy at the absolute peak of his power and influence. Then came April 1945, and everything Fegelein had built across 15 years began to collapse in 72 hours. On the night of the 24th of April 1945, Himmler made a telephone call. He was at the Hohenleichen Sanatorium, approximately 80 kilometers north of Berlin, which he used as a combination headquarters and personal treatment center for the stomach cramps and psychosomatic ailments that plagued him throughout the war. He arranged a meeting with Fegelein for the following morning, the 25th of April. What Himmler needed to discuss with his liaison officer was specific and urgent. He wanted to send his personal escort battalion, several hundred heavily armed troops, into Berlin, officially to assist with the city's defense, in reality to position himself close to Hitler as his secret plans reached their most critical phase. Because Himmler had been conducting secret negotiations with the Western Allies. Through Swedish Count Folke Bernadotte and a representative of the World Jewish Congress, Himmler had been attempting to position himself as the man who could end the war in the West while simultaneously stopping the Soviet advance. The negotiations were real. The British had been stringing Himmler along since at least 1943, consistently encouraging him to move against Hitler as a precondition of any Western agreement, a strategy that British intelligence found useful for reasons that had very little to do with actually negotiating with Himmler. Fegelein knew all of this. He had known for some time, and on the morning of the 25th of April, he attended the meeting at Hohenleichen, knowing things about his boss's activities that would get both of them killed if they became known to Hitler. After the meeting, Fegelein drove to SS headquarters at Flensburg for a final meeting with SS General Ulrich, chief of the SS leadership main office. We do not know the exact substance of what they discussed. What we do know from Ulrich's post-war testimony is what Fegelein said when asked about conditions in the Führer bunker. He said that Hitler and his staff were planning to take their own lives. He called the bunker a lunatic asylum. And then he said something that tells you everything you need to know about what he was planning. The Valhalla stuff is for the Bayreuth Festival, but not for me. He was not going to die in the bunker. He had already decided that. What he had also decided, and what almost no account of this story properly examines, was precisely how he was going to avoid it. Fegelein could not return to Berlin by car. The Soviets had cut the road on the morning of the 25th. He reported this to Himmler, who immediately dispatched a Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft to Rechlin Air Base to fly him back into central Berlin, landing at Gatow on the city's western perimeter. Here is the question that Fegelein's subsequent behavior forces us to ask. Why did Himmler send a plane? The official explanation is that Himmler wanted Fegelein to return to his post at the Führer bunker and take command of the escort battalion. But Fegelein's subsequent behavior over the next 48 hours suggests a more complex arrangement. Because when Fegelein arrived back in Berlin on the 25th, he did not go to the Führer bunker. He went to a secret apartment in the Kurfürstendamm area of Charlottenburg, 4 miles from the bunker, leased under the name of a friend of his, where he had installed one of his long-term mistresses. He had told no one of this apartment's existence except Hitler's adjutant, Günsche, and only because he had been extremely drunk when he let it slip, giving Günsche a telephone number for emergencies with instructions to use it under the most extreme circumstances. He then proceeded to miss the Midnight Situation Conference on the 25th of April, then 2 situation conferences on the 26th. Then on the 27th, Hitler asked for Fegelein and was told he was nowhere to be found. 6 situation conferences missed without explanation. For any officer at Führer headquarters, this was extraordinary. For Himmler's personal SS liaison, it was essentially a declaration of intent. Hitler telephoned SS General Hans Rottenhuber, chief of his RSD bodyguard unit, and ordered him to find Fegelein immediately. Rottenhuber had no idea where Fegelein was. His Berlin apartment had been destroyed by Allied bombing weeks before. His official quarters at the Reich Chancellery appeared untouched. He had simply vanished. Then Gunsche, who had been carrying the secret of that telephone number for days, decided the circumstances qualified as extreme enough to use it. He told Rottenhuber. Rottenhuber ordered the bunker switchboard operator, SS Sergeant Rochus Misch, to identify the address for the number. Misch did it in minutes. Rottenhuber telephoned the number. Fegelein answered. He sounded surprised. Then he quickly recovered his composure. He told Rottenhuber he had been drinking and had a severe hangover. He promised on his honor of an officer to report to the bunker within 2 hours. He did not report within 2 hours. He did not report at all. But here is what Fegelein was actually doing during those missing 48 hours, because this is the part of the story that the historical record almost never gets right. On the afternoon of the 27th of April, approximately the same time Rottenhuber was beginning to send search parties toward the Charlottenburg apartment, Fegelein telephoned Hitler's chief driver, SS Lieutenant Colonel Erich Kempka, who commanded the Reich Chancellery garage and motor pool. He asked Kempka for 2 vehicles with drivers. He described the purpose as reconnaissance. Kempka provided the vehicles. Fegelein appeared in the garage in full uniform, boarded the vehicles with his adjutant, and directed the drivers toward the Kurfürstendamm area. A short time later, both vehicles returned to the Reich Chancellery, minus Fegelein and his adjutant. The drivers told Kempka that Fegelein had dismounted near the Kurfürstendamm and proceeded on foot. Think about what this tells us. You do not need 2 cars to transport 2 men 4 miles across a city. You need 1 car. The request for 2 vehicles, specifically 2 from the chief of the Reich Chancellery motor pool, is a reconnaissance exercise. An experienced cavalry commander testing whether a small convoy could safely navigate a specific route through a city under artillery bombardment. But the vehicle test was only part of the conversation with Kempka. He also told him something else. He said that at 10 o'clock that night, he wished to meet Kempka at the Reich Chancellery, and at that meeting, Fegelein said he would hand over a briefcase. Inside that briefcase were what he described as extremely important documents belonging to both Himmler and himself, which must under no circumstances fall into enemy hands. He was calling in a personal favor from a man he trusted, and he was asking that man to hide some of the most dangerous documents in the Third Reich, while Fegelein disappeared with his mistress and whatever else he had been assembling in that apartment over the previous 48 hours. That 10 o'clock meeting never happened, because by 10 o'clock that night, events had overtaken both men.
The first search party Rottenhuber sent to the Charlottenburg apartment was led by SS Captain Helmut Frick of the Führer Begleitkommando. Frick had neither the rank nor the authority to arrest Fegelein. He was a captain and Fegelein was a lieutenant general. His orders were to persuade Fegelein to return voluntarily. The journey of 4 miles through wartime Berlin took over an hour. One of Frick's men was wounded on the way. When they arrived, Frick knocked politely on the apartment door. Fegelein answered it. He was not in uniform. He was unshaven. He appeared very drunk, and there was a woman in the apartment. The woman was unidentified. Over the course of 30 minutes, Frick attempted to reason with Fegelein. Fegelein was uncooperative. He even, according to Frick's testimony, tried to persuade Frick himself to desert. After half an hour, Frick gave up and returned to the Reich Chancellery. Martin Bormann, Hitler's extraordinarily powerful private secretary and party minister, intercepted Frick's report to Rottenhuber and immediately became furious. He berated Rattenhuber for sending a captain to deal with a general. Rattenhuber now dispatched his RSD deputy, Lieutenant Colonel Hergel, with 5 men in an armored half-track. Hergel's party arrived at the apartment. They broke down the door. They found Fegelein at a round table, helping the unidentified woman pack a small leather suitcase. And here is where the story that history has been telling for 80 years begins to fall apart completely. Because when Hergel went into the kitchen to speak with the woman, the window was open, and the woman was gone, down the fire escape, into a burning city, carrying nothing but the story she could not afford to leave behind. Fegelein was brought to the Reich Chancellery. Hergel took charge of the suitcase. When Bormann emptied it onto the map room table, the room went quiet. Diamonds, rubies, opals, gold jewelry, 3 gold watches, including one belonging to Eva Braun sent for repair, over 100,000 Reichsmarks, 3,000 Swiss francs, road maps of Berlin and its surroundings, and 2 passports, both carrying the same photograph, the woman in the apartment. Different names on each. One of the passports was British. Martin Bormann looked at what was on the table, then he looked at the men standing around it, and he said something that changed the nature of everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. She was an enemy agent. Fegelein is a traitor. He is the source of the information leak from Führer headquarters. The escape kit on the table was not Fegelein's. It belonged to the woman. The woman was not his mistress, or rather, she was his mistress, but she was also something considerably more dangerous. Who she was, what she knew, what deal she had arranged for Fegelein, and whether any of it was connected to Himmler's negotiations with the British is one of the most closely guarded secrets of the final days of the Third Reich. Let us start with what the witnesses said about her. Several members of Hitler's inner circle had met the woman socially during 1944, when Fegelein had introduced her around. Their descriptions, gathered from post-war interrogations and memoirs, are consistent in the broad outline and inconsistent in the specific detail in a way that tells you something important. Hitler's adjutant, Gunscha, remembered her as classier than most of Fegelein's other women. Good-looking, tall, well-groomed, blonde hair with a reddish tint, approximately 30 years old. She spoke German with an accent. She spoke at least 2 or 3 other languages fluently. Rukis Misch, the bunker switchboard operator, thought she was Scottish and married to a Hungarian. General Mohn, who commanded the inner-city defense sector and presided over Fegelein's court-martial, knew she was foreign but thought she was Danish. Hitler's pilot, SS General Hans Bauer, thought she was Irish, married to a Hungarian diplomat stationed in Berlin. The story of how Fegelein had met her is the detail that changes everything. Bauer and others reported that Fegelein had been introduced to the woman through Dr. Goebbels. She had been doing translation work for the propaganda ministry at Deutschlandsender, the German radio station, working specifically on the Germany Calling program, which was broadcast in English to British audiences. Fegelein had apparently been introduced to her at the Goebbels Villa at Schwanenwerde. The original target of whatever operation she was running may not have been Fegelein at all. Goebbels was the primary propaganda minister. His access to strategic information was considerable, but Goebbels was not a drinker, not a loose talker, and not vulnerable to the particular kind of manipulation that intelligence services call a honey trap. Fegelein was all 3. An SS general, Himmler's personal liaison at Führer headquarters, a blabbermouth, a heavy drinker, married into Hitler's immediate family, the ideal intelligence asset, and apparently completely unaware of what he had become. Confirmation that this woman was not simply Fegelein's mistress came from a source that nobody expected. Richard Crossman was a British Labour Party politician. During World War II, he was part of the Political Warfare Executive,
the psychological warfare arm of British intelligence, where he headed the German section. In 1955, Crossman told historian James O'Donnell that the PWE had had some dealings with a female agent operating inside Hitler's inner circle in the final year of the war. The code name, Crossman said, was Mata O'Hara, a deliberate joke combining the name of the real World War I spy, Mata Hari, with the Irish surname O'Hara. The code name itself tells you something. It tells you the people who created it knew exactly what kind of operation this was, and they found it funny. Crossman added that when British forces reached Berlin in July 1945, no trace of this agent was found. He also said something that Crossman considered significant enough to mention specifically. The cream of the jest is that she was not English, she was Anglo-Irish, and very pro-British. After considerable research, there is a possible candidate for the identity of Mata O'Hara. Her name was Rosalind James. She sometimes called herself Nora O'Mara or Rosalind Omar, both names eerily close to the code name Mata O'Hara. She had worked as a translator for Deutschlandsender in Goebbels' department. She was in Berlin when the Soviets attacked. She fit the physical description given by multiple members of Hitler's inner circle who had met Fegelein's mistress. She spoke German fluently, but with an accent. She spoke multiple languages. Rosalind James turned up in Paris in the first week of June 1945. She was interrogated by MI5, and then something extraordinary happened. Nothing else happened. Every other British citizen who had worked for the German propaganda apparatus during the war was investigated. Most were prosecuted. Several were imprisoned. Some were executed. The standard procedure was thorough and unambiguous. Rosalind James was quietly released. No charges were ever brought. The entire affair was dropped without explanation. In the intelligence world, a case that is quietly dropped rather than closed is not resolved. It is buried. The distinction is significant. Cases are closed when the answers are satisfactory. Cases are buried when the answers are too significant to share. The files relating to whatever operation Mata O'Hara was running at the heart of Hitler's inner circle have never been released. 80 years after the events in that Charlottenburg apartment building, they remain classified or destroyed. Now consider what this means for the story of Hermann Fegelein. Because Fegelein's behavior over the 48 hours between his return to Berlin on the 25th of April and his arrest on the night of the 27th makes considerably more sense if you understand that he was not panicking and hiding, he was executing a plan. He returned to Berlin, not voluntarily. He was flown back on Himmler's specific order in a Junkers U-52 transport aircraft. This detail is critical. A man running away from his responsibilities does not fly into the city that is being encircled. He gets on a plane going in the other direction. He went directly to the secret apartment where he had installed Mata O'Hara. Not his wife, not his family. The woman. Over the next 48 hours, the two of them assembled what the suitcase later revealed to be a professional-grade escape kit, jewelry convertible to cash in any currency, gold watches, hard currency, including Swiss francs, road maps for navigation through and out of the city, 2 passports in different names for the woman. He tested the vehicle route between the Reich Chancellery and the apartment. 2 cars, not 1. Cargo capacity. This is not a man in a drunken panic. This is a cavalry commander assessing route viability for a small convoy. He arranged for Kempka to receive a briefcase at 10 that night, documents that neither he nor Himmler wanted to survive the fall of Berlin. The documents were found later in his Reich Chancellery quarters by the Gestapo. They described overtures to the Western Allies, evidence of Himmler's secret negotiations, the same negotiations that Mata O'Hara may have been helping to facilitate from inside Hitler's headquarters. And somewhere in the Tiergarten, a Junkers Ju-52 was waiting on the emergency airstrip near the Brandenburg Gate. Several credible witnesses saw it. Test pilot Hanna Reich noticed it on the 28th of April as she and General Greim were departing the strip. She noted that the aircraft's pilot was standing beside the plane, waiting. The presence of this aircraft has never been satisfactorily explained by any historian. Its purpose that night, if O'Donnell's theory is correct, was to carry Fegelein, Mata O'Hara, and whatever cargo they had assembled from the Reich Chancellery out of Berlin to Himmler's headquarters in the north. The plan came within hours of working. It failed because Fegelein drew too much attention to himself by missing 6 consecutive situation conferences, because his adjutant returned to the Reich Chancellery in uniform and was interrogated, because he had once, while extremely drunk, given his telephone number to Hitler's adjutant with instructions to use it only in emergencies. An emergency had occurred. Now to the court-martial. And this is where the story takes a turn that the historical record has consistently misunderstood. Fegelein was brought before a tribunal chaired by General Mohnke, commanding the inner-city defense sector. The other judges were Generals Bergdorf and Krebs and Rottenhuber. The observers were Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann and Lieutenant Colonel Hergel of the RSD. What happened next has been described by every history book as a drunken breakdown, a coward falling apart under pressure, the last disgrace of a disgraced man. General Mohnke's testimony describes it differently. Fegelein entered the room and immediately challenged the composition of the court. He declared he was only responsible to Himmler, not to Hitler. He rejected defense counsel. He refused to defend himself. He cried. He vomited in the corner of the room. He shook uncontrollably. At one point, he urinated on the floor. He tore off his own epaulets. Every history book says they were torn off by angry members of the court to humiliate him. He removed them himself and threw them on the floor. He called the assembled generals, quote, a collection of German assholes. Now consider what this behavior actually accomplished. German military law was specific and unambiguous on one point. A man had to be of sound mind and body to stand trial, to hear evidence against him, and to understand his own defense. A man who was demonstrably incapable of rational participation in proceedings could not be convicted by those proceedings. The manual was clear. Mohnke consulted with his fellow judges. He had no choice. He adjourned the court. He dismissed it entirely. Fegelein was not convicted. Fegelein was not sentenced. Fegelein was handed to Rottenhuber, having been formally found unfit to stand trial. Now recall what we know about Fegelein's actual behavior during those 48 hours. He had been noted in full uniform and showing no signs of intoxication by Kempka at the Reich Chancellery garage in the late afternoon of the 27th. 2 hours later, Frick found him drunk, unshaven, and out of uniform at the apartment. 2 hours after that, Hergel found him drunk, but now back in uniform and clean-shaven. A man who is genuinely drunk does not spontaneously sober up enough to shave and dress in full uniform. A man who is genuinely drunk does not then return to appearing drunk 2 hours later. A man who is genuinely drunk does not execute a vehicle reconnaissance of an escape route. He was performing. The drunkenness was a theater. The histrionics in the court-martial were a calculated gamble that German military procedure would force the court to dismiss rather than convict. The gamble worked. He bought himself time. What he could not have known was that on the afternoon of the 28th of April, time ran out. Not because of anything he had done, because of something Himmler had done. The British had a weapon they had been saving, and they used it on the 28th of April, 1945. They leaked Himmler's secret negotiations to Reuters news agency. The story ran on the wire services. The BBC repeated it on their radio broadcast that afternoon. It reached the Führer bunker within hours. The Hitler reaction was initially nothing. He sat with the information. Then Martin Bormann and Joseph Goebbels went to work on him. They both understood for years what Himmler was doing. They had both been waiting for exactly this moment. They worked Hitler through the afternoon and into the evening until the rage that they had been cultivating finally ignited. Hitler denounced Himmler. He ordered his arrest. He ordered his SS rank stripped. He drafted orders to Grand Admiral Dönitz's headquarters in northern Germany, where Himmler had established his final base, demanding the Reichsfuhrer be taken into custody. Dönitz read the orders and quietly did nothing, unwilling to provoke a confrontation with a man who commanded hundreds of thousands of armed troops. But Hitler could reach one man connected to Himmler, one man who was already in custody, one man whose guilt was written in 2 passports and a suitcase full of jewelry, and whose behavior over the previous 48 hours had demonstrated exactly where his loyalties lay. Eva Braun went to Hitler. Her eyes were red from weeping. She pleaded for her brother-in-law's life on behalf of her sister Gretel, who had just given birth to Fegelein's daughter in Bavaria. She tried to argue that his behavior was the natural impulse of a man wishing to be with his wife and child. This argument would have been more persuasive if Fegelein had been found at his wife's location rather than at his mistress's apartment, helping a probable British intelligence agent pack an escape kit. Hitler heard Eva Braun's play. Then he retired to his rooms with Goebbels and Bormann. Then he emerged and gave the order. Fegelein was to be shot. The precise circumstances of his execution remain murky. Multiple versions exist, and none can be fully confirmed. What the evidence supports most strongly is this. Sometime around 11 o'clock on the night of the 28th of April, 1945, approximately 1 hour before Hitler married Eva Braun in the map room of the bunker, Hermann Fegelein was walked into a garden space adjacent to the Reich Chancellery by a small group of RSD men. Hitler's secretary, Traudl Junge, who did not witness the scene but heard about it on the bunker grapevine within hours, said the execution took place near a statue of a little girl under some blossoming trees in the garden of the Foreign Ministry, immediately adjacent to the Reich Chancellery grounds. He was shot in the neck by an NCO, on the order of the officer present. He was wearing a uniform stripped of its insignia and decorations. His identity documents and dog tags had been removed. His body was left where it fell. The gardens were under sporadic Soviet artillery fire. Nobody was going to risk their life to bury Hermann Fegelein. His body almost certainly lay where it fell for several days until Soviet forces overran the area and German cleanup crews working under Red Army supervision interred the dead from the Reich Chancellery grounds in mass graves nearby. His body has never been formally identified. His grave, if it exists, has never been located. Rokas Misch, the bunker's switchboard operator, gave interviews to historians for decades after the war. He said he knew exactly who had shot Fegelein. He refused to name the person. He said only that the person had survived the war. Think about what that tells you. Misch protected the identity of Fegelein's killer for the rest of his own life, not because the action was shameful, because the person who carried it out was alive and did not want to be found. Here is what this story is actually about. Not the execution of a coward, the execution of a man who knew too much and had chosen the wrong side at the wrong moment. A man who had spent 15 years building a career on proximity to power and had finally tried to use that proximity to buy himself a different future. The woman in the apartment was not simply his mistress. She was either his handler or his ticket. The documents in his Reich Chancellery quarters connected him and Himmler to negotiations that Hitler considered treasonous.
The escape plan was real, was sophisticated, and came within hours of working. Fegelein did not die because he was a coward who panicked. He died because the British Intelligence Service chose the 28th of April to leak Himmler's negotiations to Reuters. That decision, made in London by people who had been managing Himmler for 2 years, triggered the chain of events that ended in a garden in Berlin at 11 o'clock at night. The files have never been released. The woman was never officially identified. The aircraft in the Tiergarten was never explained. And the full nature of whatever arrangement Fegelein had made with British intelligence remains one of the last genuine mysteries of the Third Reich. What we know is what the suitcase told us. 2 passports, one of them British, a woman who disappeared down a fire escape and materialized in Paris 6 weeks later, having been quietly cleared by MI5, and an SS general who died an hour before his brother-in-law's wife married the man who ordered his execution. The history books call him a drunk and a coward. The evidence suggests something considerably more complicated than that. The truth, as it almost always does, turned out to be more interesting than the legend. If this story made you think differently about what you thought you knew about the final days of the Third Reich, subscribe now. There are dozens of stories like this one buried in the records of the Second World War that history has been telling wrong for 80 years. We're going to find every one of them. The next one is already being written.